Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Looks like a small crowd so far. Hopefully, we'll get more that'll jump on. But good morning. I'm glad to be back on the dais this morning for a great topic. I know that Holly O'Donnell was scheduled to be the facilitator for this morning's session, but she had a family conflict, so I'm stepping in, and just turns out I've recently done a couple of workshops and the like for around this very topic, so it wasn't going to be a difficult transition. So good morning. We're here to talk about trust and credibility, and so give me a second here, and I'll share my screen so we can pull up the. All right. So yeah, this morning's topic is all around trust and credibility, and the ability to the idea that we want to what does that mean? What does that mean to build trust and the like? And it's an issue that is prevalent no matter what line of work you're in: for-profit, nonprofit, first line leadership, CEO. So it's an issue it's very prevalent and comes up in conversation quite a bit. So just as a quick reminder, first of all, is there anybody that is joining us for the first time? I see a lot of familiar faces, so I don't think we have, but I just want to make sure we don't have anybody that's joining us for the very first time. So most of you have been through some of the previous classes, but so as a reminder, we're still in the managing relationships, that middle section of the three parts that make up the year-long program, where we started off with leading ourselves, and now we're in the middle here of managing relationships, building off of the communications and conflict sessions that Tish Thompson did for you. And then Gina McLowry will be our next facilitator, talking about problem solving and critical thinking, which we'll talk about a little bit here in this morning's session. So just to get us in the mood for what we're about to talk about, let's enjoy a short video clip here.
Hey, you can do this. Believe with every step. Oh yeah!
You got me right.
I still got you. Yeah, like what is this?
This is amazing.
Yeah, but just keep going. Don't look back. Just straight ahead.
You still got the rope, right?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
What do you want from me? What do you want from me? What do you want from me?
Okay. There we go. Had anybody seen this movie before? It's one of the newer Pixar movies that I understand. So I figured it would be at least a nice way to kind of introduce this idea of trust and what it means. What did you pick up as far as some of the things that were said? What would you pick up in just that short clip when we think about trust and what it means to you? Anybody?
Something that stood out to me was him saying that you have to believe at every step. I thought that was
Yeah.
important because sometimes you can trust it for just a little bit and then start going backwards. So like keeping if you have that trust, maintain it throughout the whole situation.
Sure, every step. It's not something that comes and goes at your leisure. Well said. What else? What else did you pick up on in the in that short clip? What's the significance of the rope? What do you think?
Of a safety line, so that in case he didn't trust himself, he had somebody to fall back on that would catch him.
But yet when the rope dropped,
Well, he didn't know that. That's why, as long as he kept trusting himself and going forward, he was okay. Then he didn't need it. He needed it more in the beginning when he didn't trust himself. But once he got going and realized he could do it, he didn't rely on it. Although he still turned around and said, "Oh, you got the rope." After it dropped, he's like, "Oh yeah, I have the rope." But so it was, yeah, because the other guy, the first person was encouraging and stuff. So that helped him
sure.
to trust himself too. He encouraged him to trust himself.
So the encouragement is actually more powerful than the lifeline itself. And that's, what I thought was pretty important in just that idea of you believe in yourself 100%, but it's really more the encouragement that you get than it is the physical risk mitigation, if you will. Okay. What else? How about the idea of don't look back? How significant is that? When we talk about trust, don't look back. What does that mean? What do you think? Carrie, what do you think?
Well, just, I don't know, easier to keep going forward sometimes than to dwell on things that have already happened. Just make sure that you keep your focus on where it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Trust that you'll make it through the process.
Years ago, I wrote a blog that it was titled, "The past is a point of reference, not a point of residence." And so, trust is that power, if you will, that works best when it's used in the present and future, and can actually be eroded if we look back, right? If he had turned around in the movie and seen that the rope was no longer attached, that past could have, what was behind him could have eroded the trust he had even though he was moving forward. So yes, it's a cartoon, but I thought it just to get the ideas rolling around this thing we call trust. I thought it was a nice, easy way to ease into the conversation a little bit. So today we're going to talk about these topics. We're going to, and by the way, I posted a copy of the participant guide in the chat. Is there anybody that does not have it? Because you should have gotten it when, some time ago when I gave it to the chamber a week or so ago. So you should have it. So good. If I'm assuming
just
now.
kind of FYI, sorry, Rick, just kind of FYI, there's many of us that were looking for the link this morning. So the Y people will be dripping in like we didn't have it. We were waiting on it. So just FYI, I don't know, just so you know, we're not trying to be rude, but we're just getting the link now.
Oh, okay.
Or we're finding it or yeah. So just no offense. We apologize for the lateness.
All right. Thanks
Rick,
for the head.
I don't see it in the chat. I'm sorry.
Okay, let me post it one more time in the chat, and before we get going in a significant way.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, no worries. No worries at all. There, it should be in the chat now. Can everybody see it? No, nobody can see it?
No, it's in there twice. I see it.
Yeah, I got it.
I see it
Oh,
both-
okay,
I
okay.
see it twice.
All right,
Mhm.
cool.
And when I got my link the other day, I just didn't move to the bottom where the attachment was. So that was my apologies. I didn't notice it the first time, but as soon as you said it, I went and looked back to the email. Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Mhm.
All right.
Mhm.
All right, so let's drive on. So here's what we're going to talk about today. What is it and why does it matter? So it, set the stage for really, why trust is such an important topic to discuss as part of a leadership development program. And then as you'll see right there in the middle of page 1 in the participant guide is the trust equation. And so we're going to break it down into its component parts, looking at credibility and reliability as the first couple of elements to what really makes up trust. And I like the trust equation because of this ability to break it down. And then we'll go into the idea of intimacy, and a term that has hit the market here, I don't know, within in earnest in the last 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years or so. And that's this idea of psychological safety. So we'll spend some time talking about this concept of psychological safety and how it ties to the trust that we build as leaders. And then, of course, you can see the below the line is this idea of self-orientation, and we'll do a deep dive into that. And of course, as many of you know, we'll end with a field work to be completed. There's actually 2 parts to the field work. We'll talk about the field work for this particular session, but then there's, as we introduced in Tisha's session last month, the component around call it a graduation goal, if you will, a goal to be completed by the end of the program that also comes with it some coaching from either myself or Tish once you decide what that goal is going to be. So if you're interested in more actively participating in the one-on-one coaching process, then we'll talk about that at the end of the program this morning. So trust. So when we look at and the same quote is at the top of page 1 in your participant guide, but when you look at this quote and that talks about trust, what are some of the key words that jump out at you? Trust each other again and again. When the trust level gets high enough, people transcend apparent limits, discovering new and awesome abilities for which they were previously unaware. When you look at that, what are some of the key words that jump out at you?
Transcend.
Okay.
Level.
Why did that, when you obviously looking at transcending apparent limits, why did that jump out at you?
You're rising up. You're rising to meet the challenge, or you're growing, or just moving forward, moving up.
Okay. So you're moving beyond apparent limits.
Mhm.
Okay. What else?
Discovering new abilities.
Interesting. When you think about that, discovering new abilities, obviously that they weren't even aware of. How do you suppose that works? What do you think's behind that? New ability, especially as a team, new abilities that you didn't know you had, but when you start trusting each other, somehow that shows itself.
Rick, I think that flows into the again and again part, because I think our work is so fluid. So I think we have to keep moving and pivoting. So I think you keep discovering, and you're going to have to trust again because you're in a different situation. So you're constantly kind of in flux, and then getting your feet on the ground in that relationship again, and then figuring out who can do what, and then moving again.
Okay. it does, because the context of our work changes over time, does it not? So, that the assumptions made in the, maybe when you trusted somebody for the first time, as those assumptions evolve, that's going to change. Okay, what else? Do we all have apparent limits that we put on ourselves? Has anybody transcended all of their apparent, the self-limiting beliefs and attitudes that they have? We all have them, don't we? We all have self-limiting beliefs in some way, shape, or form. I used to believe that you'd have to be crazy to run 26.2 miles, which is a marathon. But then I got into a situation where my brother-in-law dared me to do it, to run the New York City Marathon. And I went and got a training regimen. I trusted that program. I mean, I followed it to the letter because I had to trust it to get beyond where I thought there's no way I can do this. So, it does allow you to get beyond whatever self-limiting beliefs that you may have through trust. What else do we see in this quote? Does this seem believable? Or is this just some fancy quote that got somebody paid, lots of money as a consultant?
Yeah, it has me thinking about, at the Y specifically, we have like reflective conversations, but also possibility partner conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about, when that relationship feels safe and is strong enough, we can really share things with one another. And we can maybe accept what others are challenging us with, or their feedback, in a different way. And really just looking, to kind of challenge ourselves.
Right.
With that.
And of course, especially at the Y now, you've got a different dynamic now that you're gonna have a new leader at the top of the organization here whenever that occurs. So that in and by itself changes some of the context that Marianne was talking about a little bit. So hopefully not a lot, but still it does. And so it helps, to really understand how quickly can a new leader be trusted by their team to do the things that they expect them to do. So, okay, well, cool. So, in your guide, just pulling the definition straight off the internet, trust, it's a belief. It's a belief in, somebody's, reliability or ability. Can they do the job? And we'll talk about all of these as a breakdown in the trust equation here in a bit. But do they believe the strength in someone or something? It's we trust people, and that's certainly a key. But you also trust that your car is going to start in the morning, and you trust that your Zoom's going to work in the morning. So you go on the Leadership Institute. So there's certain trust factors that are just built into whether things are going to happen the way they should. So just breaking down a very simple definition. But the lion's share of our conversation today is really going to be about this. It's going to be about the trust equation. And like I said, I like it. I like this particular format because it allows us to kind of dive into some of the piece parts of what is trust. I mean, we saw the definition on the previous slide. but then what does that really mean? So we're going to spend the rest of the session this morning breaking down this equation and what it really means in each one of these piece parts. But as you can see, you know, the overlying definitions of each of the moving parts of around trustworthiness is this credibility, which are we believable in our words? And then are our actions, are we reliable? As you know, can we keep a promise? Now, you don't have to say, I promise to do something, but every time you say you're going to do something as a leader is in essence a promise to follow up on your word, right? So every time you make a commitment, you raise your hand to say, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, no matter how large or small it is, you're basically saying, I'm promising to do this, because then your actions are going to align with your words. So your credibility and your reliability are both in alignment. And then we talk about this idea of intimacy, the emotions that are revealed through safety. And again, we'll talk about psychological safety in great detail, but there has to be that emotional safety that comes with having conversations that sometimes, you know, as you learned last month when Tish was, talked to you or worked you through the idea of conflict. You know, not everybody's comfortable with conflict. Most people would rather avoid conflict than any of the other 4 ways of dealing with conflict. But fact is, a lot of it is because of the emotional component to it and the ability to manage through those emotions. And then the last piece is this idea of self-orientation, which is really around the caring revealed in one's focus. And we'll learn more about that as we cycle through the conversation. So let's jump in and start with this idea of credibility. Now, we just said credibility relates to the words that are revealed through being honest or being perceived as being honest. Are you believed or are you believable? And so what does that really mean? Do you think people believe everything you say? And why wouldn't they? Why would or would they not just at face value believe what you say? What do you think?
Well, if you haven't followed through on commitments or your word, I mean, that's where it begins.
Right. Because
Previous experience.
as we'll see later on, there's a lot of things that sound believable, but it's really up to us to make sure that we are believable in this idea of also being credible. Now, the challenge we run into is we live in this information-rich, knowledge-poor world, which, you know, the difference between information and knowledge is information is, you know, what you get off of a spreadsheet, what you pull out of a database, what you see on a chart. Knowledge is, what does that mean? It's the context of that information. And so we have access to a wealth of information, but we're information-rich, knowledge-poor, which means we're heavy in the stuff, but we're light on the meaning of the stuff. And so that's where the credibility comes into play, is that just because, you know, we've all seen the commercial, well, it must be true, it was on the internet. You know, one of the things I have to, you know, every time I teach a class at Aurora University, I have to remind my students that Wikipedia is not a scholarly resource. So whatever it says on Wikipedia, because usually that's the first thing that comes up if you Google anything, is the Wikipedia page for that topic. But just because it says there in Wikipedia doesn't necessarily mean that it is 100% true and reliable. So we're always managing this gap between what is said and what seems to be true. And I mean, let's face it, one only has to spend 5 minutes on a social media account, pick your platform, doesn't really matter, to realize that this gap does exist. Does it seem right, or is it true or is it not? And we'll talk about how we combat through that here in a bit. So social media specifically is going to be prevalent in these next couple of slides, because it is a medium that a lot of us rely on. We're using it for professional communications. We're using it for personal communications. And so we gotta make sure that we're really understanding this gap between what is said and what is true. So one of the key components to this idea of credibility is this concept of critical thinking. Now, critical thinking is to me it's a gap in the world of leadership, because we do live in this information-rich, knowledge-poor world. So when you look at the definition here, it's a process where we question our own assumptions. I mean, literally, we're to do it well, we have to say, okay, this is what I believe, but why do I believe it? Or why do I think it to be true? What are the facts that are supporting whether or not this is true or not? So it's questioning, leaders literally questioning their own assumptions as well as those of others, using research, analysis, questioning, exploring new ideas to inform in a way that it gets past our opinions and subjective perspectives of those that are around us, including the status quo. I've always said that the status quo is the enemy in a fast-moving business world. For-profit, nonprofit make a difference. You get too hung up on the status quo, and you start to erode your ability to critically think. So when we look at this definition, share some insights. What does this mean to you when you think about the way you think and the way you process information that is coming at you fast and furious? What are the implications that this idea of critical thinking pose as a leader specifically?
Well, it keeps you innovating. I mean, it keeps you in motion, and it keeps the whole business and yourself moving forward, and being willing to make mistakes and explore, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Critical.
But see, not everybody would agree with that very last part. It is critical, but aren't we more or less creatures of habit? I think we kind of like the comfort of tomorrow is going to be just as predictable as today. We kind of like that as human beings. So how do we impress upon the idea that it's critical to evolve? Tim, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I know often it becomes a case where things just get done because that's how we've always done it. And, that's something that kind of, my previous position was a data role, and that kind of drives me crazy in terms of like, hey, we can, use this information, let's turn it into knowledge and find a way to move forward with it. But it a lot of times that's going to be a culture change, because
Right.
People, like you said, are so stuck on kind of, the way that things have been done before. So it takes a lot of time and takes a lot of reinforcement to make those changes happen.
Yeah, I appreciate that, especially from a data perspective. It's there's been studies that have proven that if somebody has a strong belief that when presented with data that contradicts that belief, they still won't change their belief. So it's very difficult, actually, even with data that says, you know, your thinking is a little off, that they still may or may not change their mind. So what else do you see? What other perspectives from what you see here? Basically saying, you know, what you think you need to at least challenge. Now, as a corporate leader, my cadence for challenging was 6 months. Every 6 months, I'd challenge. People would ask me, how did I progress through the corporate leadership ranks as quick as I did? One of my first answers is pretty much everything I've done began with some version of why not or what if, which is basic critical thinking language.
Rick, I just wanted to comment that I think in the corporate world, what we're seeing with diversity and inclusion kind of plays into this a little bit. You know, different people with different backgrounds have a perspective on critical thinking and processes and, you know, everything status quo. So I think that's playing into the world, the corporate world today.
And you're absolutely right. You know, David, and this does tie in, not a little bit. I think this ties in. I'll make that connection here in a bit, that it ties directly to, for those that were here in March when we talked about attitudes and behaviors, and we talked about DEI specifically. We'll make that connection because there's a stronger connection than a little bit. So I think you're absolutely right. Why do we hold on so tight to the status quo when we know intellectually that if we stay the same, we die as a business?
Is it comfort and security?
I mean, that's certainly part of it. That goes to my comment earlier about, I think we're, you know, humans just like that predictability of life, except for us contrarians. I mean, I come by it probably more naturally than others, but I've been a contrarian most of my adult life because I'm always challenging, why are we doing it this way? Is there a better way? And as a leader, being able to ask the questions of my staff, of my teams, and saying, how can we do it better? Because trust me, the further you go, you know, the further away from where the rubber meets the road you get, the less you know about what really matters and what's really happening. So you have to trust those that work on the front lines to provide you with what I call ground truth. Not what you read in reports, it's what's really happening on the street, if you will.
I think a little bit of this has to do with culture, either in a corporate setting or nonprofit setting, because I feel like some leaders may be great at critical thinking, but then some leaders may also be blocking critical thinking within the organization. And so I wonder what can we do in that instance where there's a culture of maintaining status quo is what we do. How do you influence that to change?
Well, it's and it's a great question. I've been there, and it goes back to, I think, what Tim said as far as using the data. When I was a frontline manager at Sprint, myself and I was managing a team of project managers, and I sat down with the sales manager that I worked with, and it became clear that because of the growth, we just weren't able to support our clients the way we traditionally had done. And so we just started our own little experiment, and we didn't tell anybody. We went out and we told our top 30 clients, this is what we're going to do. We're going to kind of maneuver some resources to be more efficient and effective at the same time. We didn't tell anybody above us. until eventually, and we had a data set that suggested that our idea was a good idea. And finally, word had leaked. And I remember getting a call from the Eastern area vice president who ran the Eastern area for Sprint Business. And he said, "Hey, I understand you're doing this, and tell me about it." And I gave him the numbers and all that. Pretty soon I took a similar call from the person out west, but it was because we had, we thought differently, but we had data to support that our idea was the right idea. So from two frontline managers in a $13 billion company, what ultimately ended up being is they created a whole new job family for Sprint Business from that idea. And so the answer to the question is really the idea. Once you get the clients on board and the data to support that, the fact that yes, this is a good idea. They can still say no, but it's harder to say no when you have data to support the fact that this is a good idea and it's better than the old idea. So great question. So let's look at this idea of, what are some of the obstacles that prevent us from, being critical thinkers? I think, Denidra, did I say that right? Denidra's question speaks to the first one. Ego just may be the thing that is prevailing. Yes, it may be cultural, but if we just look at it from who we see in the mirror, is our own ego preventing us from challenging our assumptions? A lot of times that when I work with leaders one-on-one as a business and leadership coach, sometimes this is the obstacle. You got to get, as I like to say, sometimes my job is to help you get out of your own way. And we all have egos. Nothing wrong with having an ego. But if the ego is so strong that it is preventing us from seeing new ideas that come to pass, then yeah, that can damage our credibility. Drone mentality, just playing along to play along, playing along to get along. Obviously that can be a challenge to think critically thinking, because critical thinking may be risky. Critical thinking may expose some ideas that might be unpopular. I can in retrospect, I can point to some times when we acted on evolving a new and different way that put me on the wrong side of popularity with my bosses. So there is some risk. And, John Bloomberg talked about that back in February when he talked about ethics and, following our ethical compass. Social conditioning. Here's where social media comes into play again. We've seen it where we just have so much information that, how do we sort it through, and how do we make, how do we figure out what matters and what doesn't matter? One of the studies that I found interesting, and it was really around those that the term is uber taskers. Now, technically the brain cannot multitask. It can't consciously do two things at one time. But I think we all know people who seem like they've got like 6 or 7 projects going at one time and they make it look easy. They're not even breaking a sweat. It's their secret, as the research showed, the one common denominator in all of them was the ability to say no. Here's what I'm not gonna worry about. Anybody know what FOMO means?
Fear of missing out. Fear of missing out.
And, in this information overload world that we live in, fear of missing out can be a non-starter relative to critical thinking, because you're trying to process it all. You don't want to miss anything. You don't want to lose any information. But in an information overload world, you'll never be ahead of that. It's, the amount of information we have access to in the public sphere doubles well, a couple of years ago, the answer was doubles every 9 minutes. I mean, when you think about all the information, video, audio, text that we have access to, doubles every 9 minutes across the globe. There's no way we can stay ahead of that. But what's more troublesome is this idea of social conditioning, of the fact that we choose what we want to believe, and how does it sway our beliefs and opinions to the point where it may damage our credibility if we believe the wrong things. Time management. Who's got enough time to do everything they want to do? Anybody? Probably not. So it's not a function of, but yet we have time management pressures. And so that we fall into this trap of, especially as leaders, we're just getting, get it done, move on, get it done, move on, get it done, move on. Critical thinking takes time. One of the challenges of leaders that I coach is, how much time are you carving out every week to challenge and reflect and think about what you're saying to be true as far as how you're running your particular team or your particular business. And if you're just letting the world dictate what you do and when you do it, then you're in pure react mode. And if you're in pure react mode, you can't critically think. Does that make sense? If you're always reacting, critical thinking is, you're just critically reacting. You're not really critically thinking. And then the last one that I've listed here is just, and it may tie to the culture that we talked about. It may tie to the ego that we talked about, but just this closed-mindedness around what is possible. It's too risky. Let's stay safe. Let's stay in a safe place and not push ourselves out where we might be exposed, because obviously the dreaded, well, what if I'm wrong, can creep into our thinking process. What others along these lines might prevent us from thinking critically about what's going on and ultimately having a negative impact on our credibility? Any other thoughts on what else may be out there?
Well, peer pressure.
Okay, that's a good one. Tell me more about that.
Oh. I don't know. I guess if you're probably a leader, wouldn't think about peer pressure much. Thinking more leader-wise.
But they do. I mean, everybody's got peers,
Yeah.
so yeah, having the peer pressure of when I was a vice president at the company I was with after Sprint, and I did things that were very different than my peer vice presidents had done previous to that. And I took some flack for some of the things I did. I mean, I was there a week and I rearranged my office, and the general counsel came in and just read me the riot act, because apparently the CEO had personally picked out that layout. And my wife and I came in the weekend before I started, and we took some of the furniture apart, didn't break anything, just took it apart, rearranged it the way I wanted it to a more open arrangement. So yeah, peer pressure happens at every level.
Rick, I had a leader in another organization tell me yesterday, because all leaders have to be critically thinking now as we reemerge and the constant changes. Sorry about the exterior noise. But she said, and she's been a leader for over 20 years. And she said, I'm not used to everybody not liking me anymore. And sometimes you just have to not be liked and be okay with it in order to forward a critical thought and be willing to make a mistake. And I think that is an obstacle. I think that goes along with the peer pressure of like, this isn't really popular, but we got to do it. And just be willing to not be the most popular leader in the moment.
You know, I've been in that situation where I wasn't necessarily liked, but I can honestly say that for those that did not like me in the moment, still respected me for what we were doing. So just because you're not liked doesn't mean you're not respected.
Mhm.
Right?
Requires a strong sense.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, it requires a strong sense of self.
It does. It absolutely does. One of the reasons why we spent 4 months talking about leading yourself, you know, building that foundation of who you are, what you believe in, because those are the things that get you through these times when you're making unpopular decisions, even though it's the right decision. Right? Being able to articulate the decisions you make, and I'm, you know, without getting into next month's topic, but, you know, being able to explain it through the lens of the organization's values, being able to explain it through your own values, being able to explain it through the vision and mission of the organization. You know, all of these things are all part of being able to get through that unpopularity to think differently about how you get ahead as a team. Great. So let's look at, you know, bringing it back. So we've talked about critical thinking. Let's bring it back then to this idea of credibility and look at some of the challenges that we have with credibility itself. So passing off perception for fact. Now, I mean, obviously, this is something that perpetuates the internet. I mean, social media is full of thoughts, if you will, that are perception and or subjective opinion. And how do you tell the difference? How do you know? How do you know when you're being fed an opinion versus a fact, especially through social media?
I feel like with, for example, the pandemic that's been going on lately, I don't believe anything I see on social media unless it comes from like a source that is like from a university or a hospital. I just don't, you can't trust anything you see on social media anymore.
Well, certainly not when it comes to things as serious as, you know, how to handle a pandemic or, you know, how to come out of a pandemic the right way. And of course, you know, the political system has learned how to use social media for right or wrong. So they are actors in the social media sphere as well. Of course, businesses use it. You know, everybody's using it for their own purposes. You know, one of the things I challenge people to do, whether students or especially younger leaders, is don't be afraid to hear the other side's version of the same event. In other words, if you're a fan of Fox News, tune into CNN and see what they say about the exact same event, and vice versa. If you're a fan of CNN, see what Fox News had to say, because it's interesting how very divergent opinions can look at the same event and apply very different context to it. So, but at least the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And part of this is this fake news is this idea of your truth and my truth. No, there's only one truth. There's your interpretation of the facts and my interpretation of the facts, but there's still only one truth, whatever that may be. What else do we, how else do we get through this idea of fake news? Besides just obviously tuning out specific sources which we know are going to be biased in one form or fashion. What else? We just turn it off, right? Just don't listen to it. But we have to get our information. We're leaders. We have to get our information from somewhere. So where do we get it? If we know that we're being somehow swayed one way or the other through traditional news channels, where do we get our information to be able to make decisions on what's really happening in the world? Yesenia, what do you think?
I kind of think of the first option that you said, just finding reliable sources to get your kind of information from. And like you said, kind of listening to both ends and finding somewhat in the middle. Because I feel like sometimes it's hard to get the full truth because maybe you weren't there, or maybe, I don't know, you still have kind of your own perspective, like you said, that might hinder that truth slightly. And then everyone else has different ways of viewing their truth as well. So I feel like you'll never 100% get the truth because there's always something kind of swaying you a certain way, but just kind of being open to hearing all of those options and knowing that it's somewhere in the middle.
Okay. Yeah, being open-minded is a great start, especially as a leader, being open-minded to, and that's all part of the active listening process. Are you listening with a preconceived notion of what you think already happened, or are you listening through the lens of, hey, there's likely going to be a different perspective here? The second one is this idea of misinformation, purposely misleading the audience either through omission or commission. What that means is, that are you purposely committing misinformation, or are you committing misinformation by leaving out crucial information? That's the sin of omission, or that's the omission part. Are you just purposely leaving out things, or are you literally saying things that are misleading in a certain way? So, that's the challenge. People, you have to recognize what is the agenda behind the communication. When we talked about communications a couple of months ago, we communicate because we want that other party to behave in a certain way. And so obviously misinformation, or, this idea of fake news, is looking to persuade, and maybe not always in a positive way. So the illusion of truth is a common issue that we have. If you tell a lie often enough, people start to believe it is the truth. So it's this idea of repetition. Something said, well, I heard it over and over and over again, must be true. So how do you combat that? What do you think?
I feel like this kind of goes into like some parentings, because they'll like lie to the kids, like, oh, if you do this, like if you eat your gum, like it'll stick to your stomach, or if you swallow the seed, a watermelon will grow inside, some white lie like that. But like the kids
Sure.
will believe it because they keep hearing it over and over and over again until like they grow up and actually kind of realize like, wow, that was a lie this whole time. That's what I think of when I hear that, because I feel like the kids all the time, like a small little lie, like, oh, if you do this, like the salesman is gonna get really mad. Like, I don't know. And that's what I think of when I hear that. It's like those little white lies that they tell the kids to like get them to behave when they're out or they're like kind of misbehaving. That's what came to mind.
Okay. And what's interesting is when those kids grow up to be parents, guess what they're saying?
Same thing.
Yeah, they're spreading the same idea. So this idea of just because you hear it multiple times does not make it credible. So here's where Tim's comments earlier about the data. What does the data say? Because my question well, first of all, I have just being a contrarian almost by nature, if somebody gives me the answer that I'm looking for, I still challenge it. So in other words, if I'm looking for yes and I hear yes as the answer, I'm going to ask, what are you basing that on?
Right.
So at least have that option, as a natural or as a habit to not challenge the fact that they're lying, but what are you basing it on? And then you'll find out whether they're basing it on opinion, or they're basing it on repetition, or they're basing it on fact. Because a lie told over and over again is still a lie. And the opposite of that is true. The fact that the truth told, the truth not told is still the truth. So here's a lie doesn't become truth, wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because accepted by the majority. So just because everybody else is saying it, and of course we all know who Booker T. Washington is, just because everybody's saying it or doing it doesn't mean it's the truth or right or good. And here's where sometimes as leaders, we have to push through that majority to say, but this is the right, this is the truth, this is the path that we need to take in order to go where we need to go or stay relevant or whatever the case may be. Final thoughts.
I'm thinking about the telephone game,
Sure.
when it comes to credibility. And so I think oftentimes, especially in leadership, like how things are maybe transparent or how they're communicated down. And it's like how much of that I think of myself is filtered through what I thought I heard, or, like how do I translate a message? And then how do I receive a message? Like, okay, was that, I almost want to hear it myself, right? Because it's like,
Sure.
Well, how did you filter it? So I guess I'm thinking about that too with all of these credibility challenges, like when you hear information or when you give information, and how important like transparency is in organizations where, especially like at the Y, like you said, transitioning to new leadership and that transparency process. So where we hear from the leaders, some of these changes. So I guess I'm just thinking about that telephone game and my role, like how I filter information, how I share information with my team, and then how I receive information. And I think thinking of that critical thinking and making sure that I'm passing off fact and I'm not misleading, or I'm not kind of my own bias in that messaging. So yeah.
And great point, Cheryl, because especially when you talk about transparency, if leaders are viewing transparency as just sharing information that they have without the context, that's where the game of telephone gets way out of whack. Because if you share information, if a vice president shares information with a director, obviously a vice president is going to have a much broader view and is going to contextually use that information very differently than a director who has a more limited view. Now we pass it down to the manager level and then to the individual contributor level. And as you can well imagine, their frame of reference is going to be different at every level. So if you're if you're just being transparent with information, then yeah, I mean, you have no idea how it's gonna be translated, where it matters the most. So you have to be very careful. You have to include the context. And that's where, but it takes time and it takes a deeper understanding of, to really say, well, this is what we're going to do. And here's why, right? Here's how it aligns to the vision and mission. It's all those things so that people truly understand. And then the fact that if the message is consistent, and that's where a bit of a transition here into reliability, but if that message is consistent over time, then now the game of telephone is mitigated somewhat, because, okay, I'm hearing the same thing. Yes, they're helping me understand what it means. And that's a consistent cadence that they're doing it with.
So that really helps me, just kind of you reframing that in terms of context. So that really does help me. Like, it's not just about information, but it's also about context and how that information contextually. So that really helps reframe that.
Excellent.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say one thing real quick on that one. I think a challenge for leaders is sometimes you cannot share all the context. And you are expected to move fast because we are critically thinking, and that's where the trust comes in. Like, there has to be a level of, like, that self-awareness piece where you just have to trust that the people who are making these decisions and know more context than you might know, you have to trust them, because sometimes the context is fluid and you can't give the whole picture of why things are occurring. Do your best, but that I think is a challenge.
Sure. I mean, I've had that situation multiple times. You get high enough in the leadership pyramid, and things that you're now legally obligated to not share until it's the right time. I mean, so you have that heightened level of responsibility, and then have to stand in front of an organization when another competitor makes a bid to buy you. And then people are asking the obvious questions, is this going to mean layoffs? Well, legally, I can't say, but I know the answer, but legally I can't say. So, I have to just simply say, I can't share that information at this point. So you're being truthful, and that's at that point, I think, Peggy, is your point, is at that point, they just have to trust me that I will give them the answer when I am allowed to share the answer.
I think that's still being, sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
I'm just saying, I hope, like, those situations would be fewer than, like, I'm talking about more kind of everyday kind of things. I think, I would imagine, Peggy, that is really challenging, and hopefully, like, the trust is there for those situations already as it's built. But I think as a leader, that would be really challenging if that was the majority, right? Where, like, you couldn't say, versus maybe some of those situations that hopefully aren't as frequent, because I think that would be really challenging then to have trust if you were just saying, trust me,
Right.
without
No,
the
you're
context.
absolutely right. In the day to day, they're going to expect more than just, trust me, I'll take care of it.
Yeah. Thanks, Tamara. Sorry.
Oh, no. I was going to say, right, if you're being transparent, if you're not at liberty to say, I think that's still being transparent. You're not saying, like, you're not making something up. You're saying, like, hey, I'm just not at liberty to tell you right now. However, right now we have to do policy. So I still think that's, a part of being transparent.
Yes, would agree. Okay, so let's, we're at 7 after. Is 13 minutes enough time to make sure the world hasn't collapsed in your absence? So we'll come back at 20 after. Okay, I'll take that as a yes. All right.
Hey, Abby.
Morning, everybody. Sorry, I got double booked today.
You're cool. Actually, everyone's like just coming on, coming back from a break. So perfect timing for you to hop on.
Oh,
Hi, Ab.
thanks. I'm wondering why it was so quiet.
Yeah.
I was
Well,
like
it's
that.
it's taped, so be sure you listen to it.
I will.
I made a note to make sure you and Betty listen to it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll go
I
back.
think you will really get a lot of value out of this one.
Oh,
I mean,
good.
they're all super valuable. They're all,
Yeah.
they all are, but this particular for you right now.
Yeah. Thank you.
How's Sydney feeling?
Better. We sent her off to daycare today. So
Oh, good. The fever.
no,
Right.
no COVID, no fever. A little bit of a summer cold left lingering, but not too bad.
It was in those moments I used to say to my husband, whose idea was this to be parents? Who got this idea in their head to be parents? Oh, the worries off the Richter scale.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that going on back and forth.
It's the best thing.
It is.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hey, Abby, how you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Okay, well, let's get everybody's video back on so we can continue the conversation. Yeah, there's a couple of comments that I wanted to call out that were in the chat that I thought were relevant to what we talked about in the first hour. Lynetta, your concept around critical thinking can end racism, I thought that was rather poignant, because you're absolutely right in the sense that it's really around the way people think. And the more we challenge that thinking, the more we challenge that those biases, those conscious bias or unconscious bias, make a difference. But the more we make unconscious conscious and challenge them through that critical thinking process, the more we'll start to think different. One of my favorite TED Talks is, he actually spoke here in Naperville, TEDx Naperville. Daryl Johnson, I think is his last name. He's got a closet full, he's a Black man who has a closet full of KKK robes, because he, through helping them think different, got over, I think it's over 300 people to quit the Klan. And it's just through conversation, just through challenging the question, why do you think that way? And so it's a great TED Talk to watch if you get a chance. But so I thought that was a rather poignant comment around the importance of critical thinking. Also, Catherine had one about, what if it's, people that think that critical thinking is not part of their role. Well, as a leader, that's part of the expectation set. Critical thinking is everybody's role. And, one of the way I would announce it to a new team that I was recently, or when I would be beginning as their new leader, one of the things I would say right up front is, I need 100% out of 100%. And if you have an idea that you don't share for whatever reason, I'm not going to be mad at the idea. I'm going to be mad at you for not sharing. I mean, literally, it's unacceptable to not share ideas. I mean, it's what makes the world go round. And so it's, creating that expectation that it is part of your role. Critical thinking is part of everybody's role. And I think that's to the point where, and I forget who mentioned the cultural element to all of this, but it needs to literally, critical thinking should be a critical part of any culture. For-profit, nonprofit, make a difference. Then the last one, Shawnee, your comment around, possibly moving too fast to think is, goes to the point you made as well, as, as leaders, yes, I can excuse maybe those that are, running and gunning on the front lines, but there is no excuse for any leader in any position to not carve out that time to say, are we going the direction that we really need to, or are we just going the way we always have? So great comments, and I appreciate that. Any additional thoughts or questions that came up during the break that I can clarify before we move forward? Okay, so as you can see on the screen, there's space at the top of page 3 in your participant guide to, when you carve out some time to say, okay, based on what we've discussed, what are some ways that you can, almost like a journal thought process or reflection process, just take a few minutes, not right now, but when you have time, look at your own context, look at your own situation around credibility, and how do you, the question I posed before, if you think you're credible in the words that you say, how do you know? How do you know that you're credible? And so just make some thought, it gives you some space there to put some thoughts down on what that might mean to you. So what we're going to do now is jump into this idea of reliability and the next step in the trust equation. And of course, here we're looking at obviously the actions that go with the words that we speak. And so it's about keeping those promises. It's people hear what you say, but they react to what you do. And so it's being able to make good on the promises that you say you're going to do and actually doing them. So it's the integrity. Remember, we talked a lot about integrity in February when John Blumberg was a guest on the Leadership Institute, in that alignment between words and actions. And then, something to keep in mind is that somebody can be, if they are reliable, then you can with some degree of certainty say then they are also credible. So their actions would speak their ground truth. But if they're credible, that the reverse is not always true. If they're credible, that doesn't always mean that they're reliable. In other words, if the words are true, if the words are believable, as we've talked about, they still need to act on those words and in order to be reliable. And so that's where, actions can suggest that what they were saying was true, but their words alone won't necessarily dictate that their actions will follow, if you follow the line of thought here. So don't give people credit for being reliable if they're credible, but you can, at least with greater probability, give people credit for being credible if they in fact are reliable. Thoughts or questions on this idea of reliability? Oops. So let's look at, this is a slide right out of the February session that talks about integrity. And so, just as a refresher, that this idea of beliefs, words, and actions all tell the same story. That's what we mean by this idea of integrity, but as it feeds into the reliability. And so as people act, and that's the key word, as people behave or act in accordance with those values, beliefs, and principles, and sometimes to the point where they will sacrifice personal gain for acting principled or acting with integrity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the self-orientation. And then, of course, the language of when that mismatch occurs or misalignment occurs, we say that they are out of integrity. So if somebody's actions are not in alignment with their words, they are out of integrity. And that's, just to, as leaders, if you're having that conversation, that's the language that should be used. So when we look at reliability and some of the challenges that come with that, here's some ones that we've identified. It wouldn't be hard to argue that change is not only constant, but it's also happening at a fairly quick pace. Would anybody disagree with that? It's coming at us fast and furious in most cases. And so what happens when that occurs is when things are just coming at us fast and furious, we sometimes get lazy or sloppy with our communications to articulate what our expectations are in, or keeping up with the expectations around that constant change. And so we all know what happens in the absence of effective communications. We're all human. Anybody care to take a stab at what happens when you don't hear from leaders, or you feel like there's a gap in communications? What do we typically do?
People tend to make up their own stories about what's going on and what's happening.
Exactly. There's a law of physics that says nature abhors a vacuum, can't live in a vacuum. And when we have a communications vacuum that can easily be created with this rapid change, this VUCA environment, if you're familiar with the term VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, when we're operating in that kind of a world, and we're not hearing, we start making up our own stories. And how accurate are those stories? It could run the gamut, but probably not as accurate as the communication that needs to come from their leaders. So it's leaders take a dent in their reliability when they, and it can be, hey, I'm not really sure what to say because things keep changing. Well, then tell them that things are going to keep changing, but you've got to be front and center. We can't ignore our roles and responsibility as a leader to communicate through constant change. The next one we see here is lack of context, and we've talked about this a little bit already, is in how important context is, where they say one thing but then do another, that and in the absence of context, you can see where, okay, as to Tim's point just a minute ago, well, if I don't hear the context, then I'm going to assume that I know what they meant by what they said, and I'm going to act based on what I think they meant. And that context may be totally 180 out from what they truly intended you to do. So context matters more than sometimes we give it credit for. Knowing why it's important, or the left and right boundaries of what's happening. And then the last one, again, we've talked about this, just lack of follow through. I had a situation where I had a graduate student whose company had been bought out by a company down in Texas. And she was relaying the story of how the new owners had promised, certain changes, and just basically made a lot of promises. And the frustration that none of those promises had taken hold. And I asked the question, well, how long ago did they make the promises? A year. A year ago, broken promises, and yet she and others in her company were still holding out that they would make good on those promises. And I said right then and there, I said, I'm putting money down that they will never make good on those promises. And they didn't. So that follow through is crucial. They just, sometimes leaders just don't realize how much damage is created when they simply don't follow through on their promises. They don't do what they say they're going to do, no matter how unpopular that may be. So what other obstacles can you think of, just based on your own experiences, that might get in the way of your reliability?
Rick, a challenge for me, I think, is as a leader sometimes is reliability of like teams, right? My team, because there's some that bubble up as super reliable And
Mhm.
so as a leader, I'm always going to them for the work. Like I see Abby just jumped on here and I'm thinking about like open staff, or we have a meeting this afternoon about our community engagement, like not going to certain staff members all the time as a leader because I know they're reliable. Like I would be like, oh, let's have Abby do it because I know she'll follow through. So
Right.
as a leader, challenging some of the others that aren't always seen as those reliable staff is a challenge. You know, like, oh, don't go to your always go to for growth. Maybe challenge somebody else to do it.
Sure. And you raise a good point, indirectly, in the sense that my question would be, do those that you don't go to know that they are not trusted because of their lack of reliability?
And I don't know if it's not that they're not trusted. You just know those that bubble up, that it's just quicker and faster. And so I find myself trying to stop myself from always going to the same people.
Well, and see, here's the, and you just proved my point.
Okay.
We don't like to tell people that we don't trust them,
Mm-hmm.
but we just established that reliability is a key component of being trusted. So I'm just putting 2 and 2 together here. But I have found that as a coach, as I'm talking to leaders, I will ask them, so why don't you trust them? Or more importantly, why do you hesitate to tell them that you don't trust them? Because nobody likes to hear that. There's 2 things that people just don't like to hear. A, they're not trusted, and B, they don't have integrity. And so, but it's the purpose of this conversation is to equip you with the pieces and parts that says, look, I believe you, but you're not as reliable as we need you to be. And that causes me to not trust you as much as I want to trust you. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it really is a trust factor. You trust Abby more than you trust the others, but that's not fair. And if you can't trust them to the level that they need to be trusted, then something else has to happen.
You know what? I think this is where we can be challenged with trusting again and again. That was the part of the trusting definition that really stood out to me. Because it's again and again, you just, give yourself permission to do it so that you can, then see what other people have to offer and get away from your own apparent limitations.
Limited thinking about, who can do what. Because
right.
My belief is that if they have the right attitude, maybe it's just a skill gap, maybe, whatever the case may be, because follow through is a skill and that can be taught. But if they have the right attitude, then that's most of the battle right there. But if they have a poor attitude and can't be trusted or aren't reliable, that's a bigger problem to tackle, but one that needs to be tackled because you need to trust everybody on your team. It is if you have an allocation for a team of 10, which is the better scenario? I've got 3 vacancies, but the 7 that are there, I trust all 7. Or I have all 10 vacancies filled, but I only trust 7. Which one's more work? More of a challenge? Any thoughts?
The second one, because if you don't trust them, you'll be, spending more time and energy, maybe checking their work or following up with them.
Right. If you're constantly looking over your shoulder to see if those 3 are doing what they're supposed to do, you're really not giving full attention to the mission at hand. And so that's why, again, this topic is so important in the leadership development process, at the end of the day, if you can't trust your entire team to do what they're, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a bit here, when it comes to safety, then requires work, requires more attention. Going back to the quote that we talked about, that Lynetta reminded us of, we transcend those apparent limits. All right, and so this is just a quote from John Blumberg. If you remember, John was a guest on the Leadership Institute back in February. Integrity is the fabric of every core value, and so it really underpins and informs and is interwoven into all of the values that we have. It's really one that people are looking at almost automatically. Do you do what you say you're going to do? So let's spend some time. I'm going to break us into some breakout rooms here, and what I'm looking for is some, based on what we've just talked about, just in a group setting. Talk about basically answering the questions, or answering the question, what are some of the things you can do to enhance your reliability, knowing that kind of that credibility, reliability combination is really in play. So just to get some smaller group ideas on what that might look like. So give me a minute here to break off into rooms. Let's see, where's my I'm not seeing, or maybe I have to stop sharing. Yep, there we go. Okay. All right, so I'm creating 5 rooms, 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll debrief what you found.
I mean, this is what I know right now, right? This is what I got, and this is how we have to move. And it feels uncomfortable not knowing, those things. I just think that communicating that piece of it would enhance it, right?
Absolutely.
When I think of reliability, for me, the word that comes to mind is prioritizing, because it feels like because many of us are doing so many things, it's like if my boss comes to me and says, hey, we need to do this, I'm not always good at asking, like, well, how should I prioritize, right? Because it's like everything is at the top of the list. And so I think with reliability for me is, how do I prioritize so that, because there's just a lot. And then you add in there too critical thinking. So if you're developing,
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I was gonna say no, because I feel like also there's so many opportunities within the why. And like, oh, like you could present at this workshop, or like, oh, I thought of you when I did this. And like I get so many opportunities that I sometimes don't want to miss out. But I'm like, sometimes I need to say no to make it so that it's actually valuable and like resourceful, like information that I'm providing that shows my work, instead of taking everything on and then doing just a little bit of everything instead of the full potential of what it could be.
When I understand that too, because when Peggy was talking, you saying about being liked and stuff, and then you're chosen, so you're like, sure, I'll do that, because you want to reciprocate, and they're giving you kudos for being able to do it. So then you're like, of course I'm going to do that. And then you get off and you're like, why did I just say I committed to the
I was curious if anyone's ever had to have one of those conversations about letting a staff member know that they're not trusted, and how that kind of went for you, or how you went about having that conversation.
Well, I will say this. It took, as a person who's responsible for the empowerment of other people in my role, I take it very seriously in a sense that I'm protective over it. But I had to, and so being protective over it, like my team members, if they, coming in my space, I want to make sure that they are mindful of, I would say, the people that we are dealing with, and not coming in and disrupting, I guess, that foundation of empowerment that I set. But I had to
Want to correct it, another way to correct it, I guess. That would be another way that would keep you credible, because that if something inadvertently happens, that you acknowledge and correct it.
I was thinking about that sort of when we were talking about like the trust. You have to have trust. How do you rebuild trust? Like I'll give a situation, like something comes from higher above, and it's just sort of like, well, we have to do this because we have to do it. And then you put all of this time, you put all of this work into it, and then the project just sort of falls to the wayside. Oh, actually, we're not doing this anymore. So how do you rebuild that in that situation? Because then the next time you're coming down with, oh, we're going to do this whole project, you're sort of feeling as a employee or not leader, as like, okay, well, last time I put all this time and all this effort into this, and you told me to trust you. I did it all. And then it ended up for nothing.
Like the boy who cried wolf.
Say,
We sidebar, of course, Rick, right when you're joining. I do have to say that it's been pretty comfortable, and a lot of the horror stories or aches and pains, you know, not so much. I'm gonna knock on wood. So yeah, surprisingly that part has been really, really good physically.
Good. Good to hear.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Oh, you're welcome.
So we sidebarred, they were kind enough to ask about my pregnancy because I'm about to be going on leave, but it did lend itself to the conversation because I was thinking about kind of, you know, supporting the new leader and, you know, just maintaining that presence for the team. But kind of this less is more concept is what, you know, brought it about to them as far as just my overall communication and everything, trying to kind of create that that distance, but you know, just kind of a different approach as we're preparing for a lot of shifts.
Cool.
Yeah. Other thoughts you guys had? I'm seeing we're already down to almost a minute here.
Yep. I'll see you back in the main room. Okay, so it looks like we got everybody back. What are some thoughts? Team one, room one. What was the headline for what you came up with?
We talked about how it can be helpful to, you know, kind of set some mutual deadlines about when things, you know, are going to be done. And then on top of that, making sure that you communicate when, you know, things change on the fly, either ahead of time when possible to say, hey, this can't happen because, you know, this emergency came up, or if, you know, in the situation where you can't have that communication ahead of time, as soon as you can after, you know, that deadline is missed or a meeting is missed or something like that. to try to, restore that reliability as much as possible, just being transparent with what's going on and understanding, especially in the work that we do at the Y, that, things happen with these families that we work with that, has to take priority.
Absolutely. Yeah, communications is such a critical piece of that reliability equation. Team 2. Would you guys? What was your headline?
It seemed like a lot of us had a lot of back and forth kind of balancing of saying no and taking things on. And then also just with our kind of work environment, kind of not having the opportunity to kind of know everyone. So just delegating the work to the people that we know are reliable, and the work will get done. And then also just kind of narrowing down people's strengths and then dividing it by that, so that maybe some people are more useful in one area, and that have more strength in that, and using those kind of strengths to enhance their reliability.
Okay. Yeah, your first one is crucial, because you have to be able to say yes or no based on the fact that, not solely based on the fact that, can I do it? Because more than likely you wouldn't have been asked in the first place if they didn't think you could do it. But is it, with everything else I have on my plate, can I do it reliably? Right? So that now becomes the kind of the qualifier is, can I do this reliably, or am I going to have to just, if you pardon the expression, half-ass it because I've got all this other stuff going on? Key point. Cool.
Well, and Yaseni did make a great point, because she had spoken to the fact that she's been asked to present several times, but that's above and beyond what she's already doing. So it's an honor, right, that she's being asked, because people know she'll do this well, but then trying to balance it. And so I think sometimes, we're asked to tables or asked to be able to do something, and we automatically want to be like, yes, because you want to be seen in that light. But then it's like, okay, now I'm going to be doing this on my own time, or struggling to get it all done.
Sure. Yeah. And there's a whole, we could spend a whole hour on the ability to say yes to the person, no to the task, in a way that doesn't damage that your reputation in that person's eyes. But yeah, you just got to know your own, as the great philosopher, Dirty Harry said, man's got to know his limitations. We all have to know our limitations, and there's presumably culturally, it's okay to at some point say, I really can't do that because other work will suffer if I do. Or worse yet, my family time suffers, or, that my life work alignment, I'm not able to do the self-care that I want, all those other things that come with that. So great. Team 3. What was your headline?
I would say communication was a big thing. Making sure that what's in our heads, or what we know, is shared with everybody, rather than just assuming everybody knows what's going on, or what you're thinking, what you're doing. So communicating really on a daily basis. Also, I would say encouragement came up as a theme, in terms of encouraging those who are working in a chaotic environment where things are like changing on a daily basis. At least encouraging them and letting them know, I guess, everything is okay, and we're going with what we're going with today, you know what I mean? And we'll get through it. And then following through on what you say you're going to do.
Okay. It's communications. And once again, it's, on some level, I would argue that if things are chaotic every single day, if they're changing, then that can be a dent in a leader's reliability as well. You know, because it can create that perception in the minds of the team members to say, do you even know what you're doing? Do you even know what's, you know, beyond today? Because I know I've worked with people like that, and it seems like you just seem always disorganized, and we're kind of the victims of that, you know. And business is crazy, but it shouldn't be crazy 24/7. Because if it is, I argue that there's leaders up the chain that are not doing their job. It all speaks to that reliability, their actions. You know, if they're shooting from the hip literally every day, that's going to be a reliability hit. All right, thanks. Team 4, what was your?
We talked about just, you know, doing what you say you're going to do. We talked about, you know, sometimes having a tendency to only communicate the meat of things and make sure that you are communicating those additional things, sort of like what Tim brought up of if something might come up, sort of what's going on in the background or why an expectation is different, to sort of make sure that you're communicating more than just the bare minimum. And then also, we talked a little bit about the flip side. You know, we might be perceiving someone as unreliable because they're not doing what's expected, but it may be that they're not fully understanding what's expected. So it's not that they're not trying to be reliable. They think that they understand, but they're really missing something. And so making sure, you know, if that's you, to be asking those clarifying questions when you're confused, or just sort of repeating like, okay, yes, you know, just to make sure this is what I'm agreeing to do. This is what is expected, to make sure that you're on the same page.
Yeah, it's an interesting flip. I like that because, you know, as a leader, and when I tell my teams I need 100% out of 100%, you know, if they're not clear on what's going on, or I'm not clear, it's apparent that I'm not clear on some of the things that they're facing, they need to be able to trust me that they can say that and tell me that, okay, you're missing something here, boss, that you need to know. And being able to have that, you know, that trust, so that, I mean, there's, you know, I've freely admitted, you know, to pretty much every team I've ever led, in certain situations, I don't have all the facts. I don't have all the information that they do because they work closer to the problem. And so I expect when they see that I don't understand, that they speak up and say, well, here's what you need to know. So yeah, I like that, working that reliability up the chain, not just down the chain. Cool. Team 5. Team 5 going once. Are you trying to see who speaks first? Is that the idea?
Was that us?
Yes, it was.
I think we were trying to figure out which number we were.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yes, that was you guys.
Sorry about that.
I can go, Catherine, if you want.
For sure.
Kind of similar to what others have said. We talked about having effective communication, being present with our teams, and then allowing space for the concerns to come up to us, and then being there to provide support when needed. Really, the main thing for us was just being present and communicating effectively.
Okay. So clearly we have a theme filtering through this whole reliability, that communications is so crucial. I think we've pretty well established that. All right, so final thoughts or questions on reliability before we jump into this idea of intimacy? Actually, we're going to take a break, and then jump into this idea of intimacy. So 5 minutes, enough time? So 5 minutes, we'll come back at 10 after the hour and wrap up the third hour of our session.
Catherine, your new place looks nice.
Oh, thank you.
How'd the move go?
It went okay. Still doing a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite set up, but thank you.
Nice.
Thanks for noticing. Yeah, right. My Zoom background's different.
Wow.
Do you have a little one there with you?
I have Noah with me.
How is he? How are both of you?
We're all right. He's sleeping better. So that's a win.
I love your hair.
Yeah, buddy, we're repping the Northwestern Wildcats today.
Oh, he's so cute. How did the fireworks go? Did you see him or hear him?
We heard them. We didn't go anywhere, see any. The kids were in bed. So
Yeah, I hear you.
yeah,
No fireworks for me this year either.
we're potty training too. So our hands are full. It's not going well. I texted Isabel and Yesenia was like, do you guys have any advice?
Yeah. You're like, what's that potty chart we have?
Yeah. What's going on?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. My mom used to put candy, which now I'm like, Mom, that was unsanitary. It was unhealthy. Right. But whatever. She did it well. She put like candy on top of the toilet or somewhere that my sister realized, oh, I get that if I go. And she didn't even have to potty train me because I just wanted to be like my sister so much. And my sister, kind of just thought I was hers. So she like sat me on the toilet. I followed her around. So I just kind of did it too, right? Thinking, I don't even know that I wanted the candy. I probably just wanted to be like her. So hopefully once she buys in, it will be easier, though opposite sex, that might look a little different, right? My brother, I'm trying to think, I'm gonna have to ask her what she did with him because I'm thinking of girls and boys. I mean, I'll probably be asking you once you get to him.
Who knows?
Huh?
I'll say if you haven't, and I don't know, it could be a gimmick, but they get like, I can't believe I'm going to say this in a group chat, but like PPTPs.
Oh yeah.
I wish we would have had one with Noah because this kid has like projectile.
I hear that's what's gonna happen. My mom was like, it just does with boys.
Never
Like,
happened with Ellie, but with him,
yeah.
room.
Yeah, and she's already told me I need to be prepared for all of that fun stuff just when changing.
Yeah.
So
PPTPs work.
Oh, thank you.
Can you guys see me okay? I had to like run down to my basement. Like I
Yeah.
can't see myself, so I'm like, all right, there's something going on upstairs.
I was gonna run out to my car, but I'll wait to do that later. I mean,
Yeah, the place looks really nice.
thanks. This is the one room, and it's of course, his room too, that I need to get more organized. It's kind of my little task this week.
Looks really bright.
Yeah, it is though. I like it a lot. I just need to hang stuff and do a few more things to make it feel cozy.
You got time.
And I got my mom, so thank goodness for her decorative eye and all, she's a Leo, so she's not stopping anytime soon. So
I don't know if this is a thing, and I don't mean to be like the scary one, but check your fridge. And if the fridge water line seems stiff replace it. I didn't know you're supposed to replace them every 5 years. Like, are.
I don't even know if I know what that is.
I don't know. The pipe in the back of your fridge. I can send you a picture.
Oh.
It's like a rubber thing and you're supposed to replace it every 5 years. We didn't know that. We've learned.
I would never know
That,
something.
that sounds messy if it fails.
You know, it's always amazing what you learn when you listen in on breaks. Yeah, it's
Mom stuff and household stuff going on.
oh no, it was dad stuff. You know, we had 3 boys, so you know, dad had a hand in, you know, making sure that process worked. You know, if nothing else, just to, you know, improve their aim.
Right? I felt like I could delegate that. Like, wait, you do this. You're gonna do that part with him.
All right, so let's jump back into this conversation around trust, and we'll get into the intimacy piece. Any questions during the break that came up that I can clarify while people are coming back on screen? We're all good. Makes sense. All right, so let's jump into this idea of intimacy. And here's where we're talking about this idea of, you know, we get into the emotions, we get into the, you know, how safe, you know, trust comes with safety. To the extent that we feel safe, then that we trust that we can have a conversation without feeling like there's going to be ramifications or negative ramifications or judgments or any of that sort of thing. So, and we're looking at the 4 elements of emotional intelligence, that being, just as a refresher, you have self-awareness and self-management. And so it's being aware of your emotions that are in play and being able to act on those emotions in the most appropriate way. Since we're talking about kids, you know, we've always told the kids it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to throw stuff when you're angry. So it's just making sure that you know, the awareness and the management go hand in hand. And then on the other side of the ledger, it's, you know, once we have a handle on our own emotions, it's how do we read the emotions of the person sitting across the conversation, across the table? So it's social awareness and managing or being aware of the emotions in others, and then managing the relationships, that managing those relationships at an emotional level. And so it's being aware of those and understanding how they impact this idea of safety. So we'll talk about psychological safety has become one of the largest predictors of trust levels. You know, Google's done research. You know, there's this growing body of research around this idea of psychological safety. The idea has been around for quite some time, but it's only recently come into its own from just in the culture that or the societal culture that we're now working in, especially around, as we've talked about earlier, especially around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's going to be the lion's share of this part of the conversation, is this idea of psychological safety and what does that look like? And so there's 4 levels, and the same diagram is at the bottom of page 4 in your participant guide. So you have the exact same diagram. So we have these 4 levels of psychological safety. And as you can see at the bottom, the footnote there, Amy Edmondson is really the modern purveyor of this idea of the 4 stages of psychological safety. She came up with an assessment that allows us to look at, you know, where an organization or a team might be in this psychological safety continuum. And so we're going to go through each of the 4 levels so that we understand, you know, what's really happening at each of these levels, starting with inclusion, learner, contributor, and challenger safety. So let's start off with this first level of inclusion safety. Now, we talked about at length, we talked about DEI as part of our conversation in March around attitudes and behaviors. And what I think is important to understand here is that, you know, when you look at the 4 stages of psychological safety, inclusion is the foundational one. So when we talk about inclusion, it's like the entry level into this whole idea of psychological safety, this whole idea of intimacy. If we can't get inclusion right, none of the other stuff works. None of this other higher levels of trust can exist. And so I think sometimes we get too caught up in this conversation around diversity, and we almost throw inclusion in as an afterthought in the conversation. So we can see diversity for the most part. You know, those are the facts, the demographics, if you will, that we talked about back in March. But inclusion is now we're at an emotional level. We're at a psychographic level, and so it's obviously it's being included in as being part of the inside group. You know, being a part of the group. Human and harmless. What do we mean by that? What is it? You know, being human and harmless are required for success at this inclusion safety level. What are we really talking about, do you think?
I think the acceptance of mistakes, just letting people know that they can be frail and make mistakes, and that's okay. You know, I think that psychological safety has to be there.
Okay. Well, it's recognizing that we're not robots, recognizing that, you know, we're flawed by design, as I like to say. So that's part of being human. How about harmless? It's not a term we often use in the leadership language, the leadership dictionary. When we talk about being harmless, what are we talking about?
I think giving everybody the same voice and the same weight, because sometimes we offer, you know, inclusion, invite people to the tables. I'm thinking more at the state level. You know, we say we want parent voice, we invite them, but then we don't give their voice the same weight as everybody else, which does harm because we're inviting them to the table, but we're not really including them.
Okay.
Almost
as a gimmick.
Constructive criticism, you know, instead of not accepting an opinion or making fun of or things like that.
Okay, that makes sense. So it really is important that we get inclusion right within the cultures, because I'm sorry, Danetta, did you have something to say as well? I just saw the.
Oh, I don't know if it was too harmless per se, but just, you know, being human and letting that be enough to not be afraid of differences, you know, or let that get in the way of us just seeing that everybody is human, and as human beings, and respecting that, I think, and vulnerable, we become harmless, I would say.
Sure.
But,
you know, how does the human lens, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, there's all this talk about intersectionality, but isn't everybody human at the end of the day, regardless of what category, if you will, what intersectional label is applied, or intersectional labels? Aren't we human at the end of the day?
right.
So that's, you know, it's something that in the inclusion conversation, this idea of human and the fact that it is fragile. I mean, this inclusion can be, because of the human nature, can be impermanent, can be temporary. And so it has to be a conscious thing. Once again, why I believe much more attention has to be paid to inclusion, with treating diversity as a means to that end, as opposed to a lot of companies getting hung up on, hey, we're diverse, but you're not inclusive. So you still got a lot of work to go. So, and then, you know, it's interesting. We were talking about communication and the importance of communication in this idea of reliability. The best way to bust up clicks is to make sure everybody has the same information, because clicks tend to form around pockets of information, pockets of knowledge. And so when everybody has the same, it's very difficult for clicks to prevail. What questions do you have on this level of safety? All right, so the next level is at this learner level. Now we're willing to be a bit more vulnerable in the sense that, you know, you're learning now, you're learning through the Leadership Institute, but where the real learning is going to occur is as you go out and apply these ideas. And you're going to make mistakes. You know, it's not going to come out exactly the way it should every single time you apply these new ideas. So this level of learner safety implies that the culture allows me to make those honest mistakes, not reckless mistakes, but honest mistakes as part of the learning process. It does include more risk because you know, depending on the culture, it just depends on how much tolerance the culture has to making mistakes, especially if they've created some level of competitive environment within teams and within the organization itself. So when you say permission, engagement, and mercy, what are we talking about here? Permission for what, do you think? What are we given permission for?
To just be, to be yourself, to be.
Well, you
to
can be your,
vulnerable,
okay. To be a
to put
learner.
on whatever hat you need to put on in this environment in order for you guys to, or you to succeed in this space. Give
Okay.
yourself permission to be.
And what does mercy mean? In this context, when we talk about mercy, what are we really talking about here, do you think?
Forgiveness when people make mistakes along the way.
Mm-hmm. Grace is another word that I've heard in the same context, giving people grace to
Understanding the courage it takes to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. So you can see where this idea of in allowing people to learn raises the bar. Not only do they feel inclusive, but they feel like they can that they are allowed to learn and not be perfect, but learn in a way that continues to contribute to the success of the organization and the team, right? I mean, it's not learning for learning's sake. It's learning for the good of the organization as a whole. So the biggest fear is to keep trying and working through those learning opportunities. We won't call them mistakes, won't call them failures, we'll call them learning opportunities, because a mistake is only a failure when nothing is learned. I mean, that's my view of how I've always treated people making mistakes. And again, we're not talking about reckless mistakes, we're talking about honest mistakes, and giving them the grace of learning how that, okay, what do I learn from that so that I still feel like I'm part of the team? Final thoughts or questions around this level? Because each one builds now. So we're inclusive. Now we have this safety to kind of stretch our wings a little bit, learn new things that we didn't already know. And now we can contribute with that learning as a full member of the team, and where everybody has that active voice. And so it's everybody plays their role. Everybody on a pro sports team, you know, it's an easy analogy. Everybody knows their position. Everybody knows how their role contributes to the success of the team itself. It's really no different in business. For-profit, nonprofit make a difference where everybody has a role. And that's where we get back to the conversation last hour, when if somebody is not fully playing their role and we not as reliable, then we get into this mismatch. So we have this social contract now where you just trust people to do their role. The only way that I could have been successful in most of the jobs that I've had in the business world, I simply could not have done if I did not have this social contract with each one of my direct reports to do their job, and they having the same social contract with their direct reports. Because you simply can't run an organization that's 600 people strong, scattered over 19 states, if you don't have that level of trust, that everybody contributes at a level that they need to. So you can see accountability becomes very much an important factor at this level for producing the outcomes that are needed. So anybody feel like they're at this level of psychological safety with their teams, perchance? So maybe a different question: if you're not, what do you see as a possible obstacle to achieving this particular level? Carrie, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I think that on my team, we're close to this and the leadership group, but we're having a hard time having it trickle down to our associates.
Okay.
And I think that it's because maybe we haven't been as upfront with what their role is and what they can contribute. So I think like our small group we have that's leading the team is contributor safety with each other, but we need to start trickling it down to everyone on our team, not just the leaders.
Okay, great point. It's go ahead.
I was going to say mine is a little different. I feel like the team that I directly manage, we are at this level of psychological safety. However, I also sit on different teams, like our leadership team and our executive team. And I think that the other teams that I sit on, we aren't here. And one of the reasons why I think that is the case is because with my direct team, I was intentional early on about building psychological safety. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time.
Sure.
But we took a lot of time early on to build that team culture and allow for us to make mistakes and it be okay. And I think in building our leadership teams, we have new members and just different people coming in at different times that we didn't have the time to step back and create some of that team culture. And I think now we're learning how to do this, but it's harder to do if you didn't start off with that in mind.
Sure. And you raise a great point, because they say that a culture of an organization is pretty well set in the first 20 employees. So you have that foundation that you can build that culture, and that's just the way that is a norm for our team. But in that flux of a leadership team, mergers and acquisitions, people coming and going, you're right, it's a little bit more difficult. Okay. Excellent. The bottom bullet is, I think, is really is crucial to understand, because, you know, more often than not, we all say, yeah, we want to be collaborative. You know, that's kind of the end game that we're all looking for. We don't we want to have true collaboration, because quite frankly, it's a requirement for most teams to be true teams as opposed to groups, is having that collaboration with each other. But it really requires you to be at this level in order to get that collaboration, because it means that everybody's playing their role the way they should, and that there's a level of trust and safety built in that if you now we'll talk about teams in September, but one of the differentiators between a group and a team is a team holds themselves mutually accountable. In other words, they don't go to their team leader to say, hey, you know, Susie or Johnny's not pulling their weight. They go to Susie and Johnny and said, dude, you're not pulling your weight. And so that's a true team environment versus a group. And so this collaboration, you need this level of psychological safety for team members to truly collaborate in that way. Okay, so the last one is now this idea of challenger safety. Now we're at a level, okay, everybody's playing their role, everybody's doing, you know, we have this level of trust that, you know, I don't have to be in the same place as you. I know you're going to do your role the best way you can, and I trust you to do that. But now when we have a different point of view, now we can have effective conflict without judgment, without fear, without being able to or worry about whether, you know, the Jerry Maguire effect, if you've ever seen that movie, you know, wrote what he thought was his honest thoughts and then got fired for it. That clearly was not a level of challenger safety. So being able to say, I have a different point of view, you know, and I agree, you know, the conversation may seem like, or may sound like, I agree with I understand the direction we're going, but I have a different take on how we need to get there, for instance, type of conversation. Challenging the status quo, typically through effective questions, but it gets us back to our critical thinking conversation in the first hour, right? This level of safety requires critical thinking. You have to have it in order to be able to have that on both sides of the conversation. And then I like this phrase, this level of high intellectual friction, but low social friction. What does that mean, do you think? High intellectual friction, and low social friction. Anybody have a thought on what that means?
Would allow stimulating debate on maybe something, but wouldn't cause you to have personal disagreements with the person necessarily, but having good discussion with the ideas.
Sure. You know, a Bears fan and a Packers fan can sit down and disagree over the philosophies of, you know, who has the better football strategy, but then they can sit down at the bar and have a drink together. Right? They can have these intellectual disagreements, and I'm just using that as an example. But the real world has plenty of examples where we can just disagree at an intellectual level and then go out to dinner and, you know, have a cocktail together at a social level. So there's low social friction. We don't hold it against. That's why it's disturbing sometimes that, you know, these political debates have split families, have, you know, split lifelong friends. That is not, you know, that's low intellect. That's the complete opposite. Low intellectual friction and high social friction. Anybody have an example where they've been able to have a really good heated debate, lively debate about a topic, and then remain friends or remain professional on a social level? Can you see where it might be difficult to do that, especially at a professional level? You disagree, therefore, you really have to keep your biases, your judgments to a minimum. Are they disagreeing on the what, or are they disagreeing on the how? That's one way I look at it. Are we having a disagreement over the what, or are we having a disagreement over the how?
Yeah, I have an example I can share with that I had with a she decided not to vaccinate her child at all since birth.
Okay.
Our program is very heavy on vaccines and vaccinating your child. So that was something that was challenging, but I was able to see her view, and we continued through the program until her child aged out, and it didn't become an issue, but it was something that I wasn't very familiar with. So I had to get familiar with that and understand her view and why she made that decision, and her approach towards her son's health.
Cool. That's a great example. So you can have that conversation and not alienate the relationship. So at the end of the day, as leaders, what are we modeling? Are we modeling the environment that creates this challenger safety? As leaders, when's the last time, as a leader, if somebody knocks on your door and says, Rick, I heard what you said this morning, but I'm really struggling with it. Here's what I think. Right. And so it's at that moment, how you handle that will spread like wildfire throughout the team. Whichever way you handle it. If you say, hey, conversation's over. It is what it is. Just go figure it out. Then that's going to be the perception. But if it's okay, maybe I missed something. What's on your mind? And having that safety to say, hey, it's come to my attention that there's this other piece of context that I totally missed. So now we're going to integrate that into what I said this morning. That kind of conversation. What gets modeled gets repeated. Final thoughts on the 4 layers of psychological safety.
I think I love this model. I just think this is really, really good. It can help people just be better overall. Agencies really work better. I love this. That's all I have to say. I really do appreciate it.
Good. But you can see how it's all baked in with our previous conversation around values, attitudes, behaviors. It all gets factored, the communications and conflict, it all gets factored into this level of intimacy that you're creating for your team. And this is where the magic is going to happen. That level of intimacy, that level of trust that they're going to have is going to get factored into the overall, how much they really trust you versus how much they may topically pretend to or conditionally trust you.
Right.
Other final thoughts or questions before we move into the final piece?
I see the challenger and learning pieces so intertwined, because I'm more apt to not maybe challenge, but it will be like, I'm not understanding this. Tell me why you're thinking this way, rather than saying, I just totally disagree with this. I'm more apt to go, I don't understand why you're thinking. Tell me about that. And that's my form of challenging that I I see those so intertwined for my style of
Okay.
safety.
Yeah, I would agree with that in the sense that there really is no hard line that says, okay, yesterday I was in learner level and now I'm in contributor level. I mean, yeah, I mean, so good point. They can tend to blend together, but at least you understand the key elements that says, okay, we're at this level of safety and I can have a conversation about, and here's how I know that. Cool.
Could this also be used as a tool kind of to help a team? An example, maybe you're not seeing a lot of challenger safety or contributions. So is it maybe an opportunity to look at, well, was inclusion and learner safety really available to get to the contributor or challenger safety?
Yes, and that's why I use Amy Edmondson as the reference, because she's really pulled it together at a team level, and she has an assessment that she's created to help teams really navigate some questions that say, here's how we know that we're at a certain level. But yes, it absolutely can be used as a guidepost for teams that really want to be true teams.
I think.
Oh, I was just wondering if the assessment is available, the one you were referencing to.
I think I found the questions, but the questions only get you so far, just as a backdrop to, but it's how the answers are interpreted that really gets you to where you need to go. So I give you the reference. I mean, you can, if you're interested, let me know, and maybe I can do some deeper research. But like most assessments, there's probably a small fee to take them, but I always look at the upside, the value you get from really seeing. I mean, for me, just knowing how inclusive my team would be invaluable.
I think people or leaders, should I say, are afraid to actually get to the challenger safety, because in this space is where you have to actually grow, because the status quo, is challenged. And like you really have to sit back and think about things and be willing to accept that there are differences in opinions. There are other ways of doing things. And be willing to accept that people don't have to agree with you in order for you guys to work together, or reach a common ground.
I mean, there is a point in which, at some point you say, okay, we've heard all the pros and cons and, all the varying opinions. And so when the leader makes the decision, it's at that point that unless new evidence is presented, we go down that path. Even if it was one that you didn't originally agree with. But even that requires a level of psychological safety to accept that is, that's where we're at. And then in the light of new evidence, then, okay, does the leader pull the conversation back in the moment to say, okay, this is a significant new piece of data. Let's reevaluate and go from there. So, all right. So let's wind down here with the very last piece, which is around self-orientation. Now, this is a repeat. You always like to, because it really is around the leader's attitude that is going to matter. Anybody remember what the top box represents? Your attitude drives what? Your behavior. Your behavior drives their attitude drives their behavior. The reason we say this is because this idea around self-orientation is what is your attitude towards your role in the group. The Pygmalion effect is named after an experiment where they gave three teachers, three groups of students. The first teacher they told the teacher that the students were all, advanced studies, well above their grade level, etc. They told the second teacher that, these students are just barely getting by, just you don't put in a lot of time, just they're barely going to make it, if they make it at all. And then of course the third teacher got a class that was a mix, of average students. And so how do you think the first teacher treated her class, or his class? I don't remember the gender, their class. How do you think the first teacher treated their class? This is the class of advanced students, well above grade level, etc.
They treated them like they were smart and like they understood things and had a lot of potential.
Exactly. How about the second teacher? How do you suppose they treated their class? Now, these are the underperformers, the ones that were barely making it.
Like,
What, Amy?
I was just gonna say, like they didn't have that same potential.
Really
Like
get
they
it.
couldn't understand.
And they treated them as such. Then, of course, the third teacher had a group of average students and probably looked very similar to what we see in most classrooms. When in truth, all three teachers had a mix of all three categories. And they did treat them according to what they were told and their attitude towards that class. So the social experiment, that's where we get the Pygmalion effect. The social experiment is our attitude as leaders is going to influence the trust that is engendered by both your trust to them and their trust to you. And so as we look at this last variable around self-orientation, now we're talking about, is your primary focus on the team, which is low self-orientation, or is it a high focus on yourself, which is high self-orientation? It's a good friend of mine who wrote the textbook that I use in my leadership classes at Aurora University, makes the distinction between successful leaders and effective leaders. Successful leaders, as he likes to say, are ladder climbing suck-ups. Basically, they have a high self-orientation because it's all about them. Whereas other leaders, effective leaders, are those that truly are driving results through the teams that they're leading, and they have a low self-orientation. So if you look at the equation, obviously, you want all the numbers in the whatever numbers are related to credibility, reliability, and intimacy. Let's just call it high, low. But if all these are high and this is low, how big is this number going to be? Simple fractional math, right? If these are high and this number is low, then this is going to be a pretty solid number. But if these are high and this one is, if this one is high as well, it offsets. So the trustworthiness is going to be lower. So it's important that we understand, what is our focus? Because, and even if we pretend this authenticity, especially relating to emotional intelligence, but our teams are going to know. Teams always know, is my leader in it for themselves, or are they in it for we as the team? So as we look at some of the obstacles that we see, it's, not hearing or seeing others in the conversation. Uses a lot of I words, I did this, I do that. Low emotional intelligence, especially on the social side. If you remember, social awareness and relationship management, really not tapping into or caring about the others in the conversation, and then being conditional about assisting others, quid pro quo, I'll do this for you, but you got to do something for me. That is not leadership. I mean, that's bartering, and leaders don't barter with their value to the team. And so any others that you might see that might, based on maybe some of the leaders that you've experienced, that would be an obstacle to having a low, which is the right level of self-orientation. What do you think? Ego could be one. Any other thoughts?
Burnout.
Burnout could be one. Absolutely. Just don't care anymore. I'm just getting by to get by. Okay. So here's one of my favorite quotes around this particular topic, since it relates to communications, which we've talked about as well. When you want to help people, in other words, low self-orientation, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. Thomas Sowell is an economist and educator and author who's written a lot of books around these kinds of topics. I love his work because he's very fact-based. He uses the facts to cut through a lot of the rhetoric and subjectivity. So when you want to help people, you tell them the truth for their own good. When you want to help yourself, when you make yourself look good, you just tell them what they want to hear, because in your mind, that's you're placating. You're telling them what they want to hear, and therefore they will like you or they will respect you more, even though it may not be the truth. Thoughts or comments on this idea of self-orientation? Okay, so you've got space in your participant guide to once again, capture any notes that you want to. So let's wind it down with some thoughts on where, kind of connecting some dots here on why all this matters. So Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And, the cover is shown in the upper right hand of the slide. And as you can see on the pyramid here, the 5 dysfunctions, which he outlines, the very first one at the very foundation of a team, the foundation of effective teamwork is this idea of trust. So trust is where it begins. Without trust, you're likely not going to have conflict managed effectively, which we talked about last month. You're not going to have a commitment to the team and the greater good of the organization. Accountability certainly is not going to be what it should be, as we talked about in that contributor level of psychological safety. And of course, at the end of the day, if none of this is happening, highly unlikely that you're going to achieve the results that you need to, the desired results of that team. So I bring this up because teamwork is going to be our topic in September, but just to tie why this conversation around trust is so crucial to our success as leaders. If we don't have trust, really, there's just a lot of other things that simply don't happen, or dysfunctions that linger, that prevent us from being true teams and true team leaders. Thoughts or comments? It's a great book if you get a chance to read it. It's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Pretty well written. It's written as a story, so it's not like a business book or anything, but it does have some great information. I use this quite often just in my own coaching practice.
Who was this by again? I'm sorry.
Patrick Lencioni.
Okay, thanks.
And of course, you'll get a copy of the slides after we're done here, so you'll have that. But yeah, Patrick Lencioni, he's written a couple of books, but this one I really like relative to teamwork. Okay, so let's wind it down then and talk about what we've, summarize what we've got and what we're expecting here in the next couple of weeks. So you see the definition of trust. It's that firm belief in reliability, truth, and ability of someone or something, and of course is the foundation of effective teamwork. The trust equation, which we talked about pretty much most of the time here, breaks down the key moving parts of trust, and of course you see the 4 that we've talked about. Intimacy is navigating the 4 stages of psychological safety, and so it's again giving you a reference point or reference points to say, are we here or are we there, just like a map would do, to give you an idea of simply, are you wanting to be trusted, or are you really trusted? And then of course, self-orientation requires that right level of focus, that balance between that favors the team, because that is your role, favors the team. And I've always said, it never bothered me that that individual accolades were part of the process. As the team is successful, I'm successful. And I've proven that theory time and time again over other leaders who felt like they had to be front and center in order to be promoted or for their team to be recognized. So field work, here's the goal I talked about at the very beginning. So goal planning is proven to be one of the best motivators for attitude and skill development. So as we said from day one, this is a leadership development process, which means that we apply the things that we learn. And so just to follow up on what Tish and I talked about last month, part of the built-in curriculum is especially for those that are attending for the full 12 months, is to create a development goal that you want to achieve or be well on your way to achieving this year. And so I'm asking you to submit the goal to me, a written goal in whatever process you use. Obviously, Tish spent some time talking about goal planning and time management. So she's given you some great ideas on how to document and what should go into that. But once I get the goal, then Tish and I will sit down and decide, who's probably the best one to coach. However many we get, Tish and I are going to split, but we'll throw in 3 half-hour coaching sessions to help you along the way. And this will be a great way, if you've never been coached one-on-one by a professional coach, this is a great opportunity as part of this program to experience that. But it starts with a goal that you want to accomplish, and preferably a stretch goal that really pushes your comfort zone a little bit. And then we'll use the coaching as part of that. Questions? Okay, then the field work for this session then is based on our discussion and reflection of your current work. I'm looking for a tangible example of trust or lack of trust on your team, department, or organization. And what specific elements of the trust equation that contributed or detracted from that level of trust. And so, I recognize right off the bat that this might be a little dicey, especially if you're have an example of lack of trust. So to play off of the topic, the only people that are going to know what you wrote is you and I. That's it. I don't share with anybody. So what we want to create is an environment where you feel safe, if you will, to be able to say, here's an example either of trust or distrust, and then use the process to help you work through that. And so the deadline 2 weeks from now, and then we'll have that discussion of around if you choose to accept that. But just keep in mind, and I can't emphasize enough, development comes from practice. And so we're giving you the opportunity to really dive in a little deeper on the topic. And then, of course, our next session is on problem solving and critical thinking. So you're going to get a lot more around the critical thinking idea in August, on August 3rd. And with that, questions, thoughts, concerns?
I just wanted to say thank you, Rick. I appreciated this session. And I actually just want to know the name of the TED Talk you had mentioned earlier, so I can.
Yeah,
go
it's
find it, if you can remember.
Yeah, I may have his last name wrong, but it's TEDx Naperville, and it's Daryl. I believe it's Daryl Johnson. But it's his befriending a Grand Knight of the Ku Klux Klan and ultimately getting that Grand Knight to quit as a Black man.
Okay.
It was kind of
Thank
cool
you.
because he had a what they call it, a chiffero, or one of these portable closets, and it was full of robes, and he had it actually on stage.
Oh wow.
So it was pretty powerful.
I bet.
Any other thoughts or comments?
Yes, hi, this is Lucy. Just a question. Are you able to send the slides here to us, or to myself?
Yes, I'm gonna send it to the chamber, and they will send it out to everybody that was on the call.
Okay, thank you, guys. I wasn't able to join earlier, and I
Sure.
kind of missed half of it.
Yeah, I'll make
All right,
sure
thank
that,
you.
and if you don't get it from the chamber, just ping me back, and I'll send it direct if need be.
Okay, and how about could it be the recording sent out as well, or no? I've asked for it before, but-
That's up to the chamber as far as when they finish up the recordings, because I know they got to edit out the breaks and stuff like that.
Okay.
But they usually send out a link to make those available, and I think they might be a little bit behind in that, just by virtue of a lot of the new staff members that they've taken on here in the last couple of months.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I appreciate
All right. Okay. Well, everybody have a great rest of the week, and enjoy the summer.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you. You
Take care.
too. Bye.
Bye.